All right, it's recording. All right, cool. Um, all right, so this week Chris and I are talking about adaptability. And the biggest thing that I have is I think it's adaptability is pretty basic, obviously, right? Or it can be. And it's really about self-assessment or self-assessment of your team. Like understanding your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, it provides a level of knowledge and insight that will give you a form of confidence because you can know what you can handle, right? And know what you can't handle. But a lot of people don't go there because they don't want to figure out what they can't handle. They're afraid of, this fear of rejection, of admitting that, we can't do this. When honestly, understanding your limits is probably just as important to breaking them or going beyond your limits as, working on your strengths to go beyond your limits, So I think pretty much one of the things that, this past week that I dealt with at work in regards to adaptability was one of the programs that we're working on. We're developing this technology for a set of customers. It was a group of 3 customers. Well, one of the customers decided after we fully developed this technology for them, they're like, hey, we don't need those anymore. So now we have to redevelop this technology specifically per their new requirements, which is going to take a while, right? And it's a whole new investment. But one of the things we had to do was, per their new request, tell them we can't do that right now. Or what they're asking for, we don't have right now. We have to develop an entire new system because what we originally developed for them, they don't want, and now we can't offer the new solution, or that solution doesn't offer the solution that they are looking for. So we had to once we found out the scope of their new requirements, we had to go back and do a self-assessment, both as a company, infrastructure-wise, team-wise, and be like, all right, look, we don't have what you're asking for right now. We're going to have to develop it. So it's going to take some time. And so what we've been in the last time is understanding the level of effort to do so. But the customer, I'm not going to name the customers on here. The customer is a very prestigious customer. And the reason they continue to work with us is because we're at least honest and we can give a justification of where we are and where we're going and kind of do our own gap analysis. And I think that's a part of adaptability, right? If you don't understand what you can offer or provide someone, you can't adapt to a changing solution or a changing environment. I mean, so that's kind of what has been going on in regards to a problem over this past week that we've been dealing with, really the last couple of weeks, but it fits into adaptability pretty good. But what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to give you the space to kind of talk through the situation. I think that idea of adaptability touches on one's own or a group or teams, like you talked about. Honesty is a big point, and then not being afraid to know your own limits, I think, is another point we need to kind of dive into, especially for adaptability. More often than not, everything you do in training, right, in your company, within your own programs, when you do your own build and demos before you show a customer, the customer is always going to ask for, or a situation is always going to come up that is maybe just slightly more than you prepared for. It may be less, but more often than not, everyone who's been in business knows
always more.
The customer is going to ask for something that is just a little different than you've built out, or is different than your blueprint. And that's just the customization and adapt and how you make it theirs. And the separation, someone explained to me one time that the difference between what a situation requires and where you are, right, is it only gets smaller the more you prepare yourself for any type of situation, or the more you understand where you can go and where you can't go. So it may be like, oh, okay, that's all we have to go. Or like, we don't know where we are, and then we find out by failing that we're so far away from what the solution really requires. So a lot of times it's better to figure out that answer first prior to, and I'm sure your company's done that, So why, when you're redoing this new one, it's like, okay, that's not really that far from where we need to go. We have a direction, we have a blueprint of how to do that. Because if you have to build the processes in addition to the product, in addition to the team aspect, the cohesion, the communicate, all of that, you have to build it net new after the problem presents itself versus, okay, we have all these things solved. Now you have to just add in their requirements and we'll change everything. It's going to take a month or two, but we'll get back to it. If you don't have all that stuff laid down or system, then I think that's where you fail to adapt.
And I think for someone, when you just mentioned system, that's pretty much essentially everything we try to do, right? We're trying to, develop, for the people listening in this course, is develop a system for every situation, every person that you can always fall back on. A key part of that system, you said it, is honesty. You have to be honest with your abilities, what your strong and what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your team strengths and weaknesses are, what your company's strengths and weaknesses are. And you have to be truly honest about yourself. Like, the worst thing you can do is say yes to a customer, knowing that you can't provide that solution just because you wanted the business. That is going to end in so many bad ways, like long-term problems, like you're going
to your point right there, what you just said, maybe honesty may not be the word that some people can get by. Maybe an objective outlook, maybe having an objective outlook on your situation, an outsider perspective. That's why people hire consultants. But that's the idea, is you need to be your own objective viewer. So
yeah, exactly. And if you can't do that, you're just shortening, you're shorting your team's potential. You're shorting your potential, right? Because you can even take this from a fitness perspective. Like, when I was training in SF, strength wasn't necessarily a problem for me because I'd always been with a football background and whatnot. But I knew I had to stay on top of my conditioning. I knew I had to run more than other guys had to run more. They had to hit the weight room more. I had to run more. There's different athletes out there. There's different companies out there. There's different teams out there. It's no different. You got to be able to prepare. You said it's all about preparation, really, and your ability to prepare and kind of understand and self-assess is the first step in that. Otherwise, you're not going to know how to close the gap. It's essentially doing a gap analysis on yourself and your team. But you have to be brutally honest with yourself and your team in order to get the best answer and the best outcome that you want to be able to provide.
May I ask this? When you have to do all your training physically, or when your team's training, in terms of what your contract or statement of work or whatever you may call it within your organization, that you send to a customer, that is always a minimum requirement. If I'm not wrong, it's always a minimum requirement of the capabilities that need to happen, or the standard that you're told before you go to a selection, whatever. It's always a minimum requirement of fitness before you show up. And then when things happen, the real world situations, and you have to go, wow, this is what I have to adapt to. And if you're at the minimum standard, right? But if you don't know where the minimum standard is or how you measure up against that standard, then you're always going to have that uncertainty within your company, within your team, within your organization. And that leads to distrust within the whole organization.
Yeah.
So
it's a baseline. Right? You want to, and to your, that goes into a little bit, and we'll talk about it more in the course, but I took my fitness perspective in regards to training my floor, not my ceiling. Guys that play on Sundays in the NFL, they want to move their ceiling up. They train for that one game, that one aspect that their 100% is better than, the next guy's 100%. That's what makes them a better athlete. Or at least a lot of the guys train, right? The way I looked at it, it was if I woke up sick, I needed my 70 or 80% or even 60% to be better than the maximum, 100% on the fitness test, 100% pass on the runs and rucks and all that stuff. I wanted to make sure my floor was raised to the level. And to your point, if the further you raise your baseline, the closer to that gap, or the smaller that gap analysis is going to be. And it's going to provide you a faster, more efficient, and easier transition into what the customer requirements are, what your fitness requirements are, what your goals are, in regards to anything you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So I guess that's on to me here. We're going to transition talking about kind of what I was thinking about, or what I was dealing with. It's this idea, kind of trying to build this in terms of adaptability, in terms of in a world-class organization, which everyone listening is trying to be better, right? They're trying to work toward being that world-class version of themselves within the organization or as an organization. So the idea that I've kind of played with or had a conversation about with people is we were supposed to present like, if this problem comes up, how do you handle it? Or how do you perceive this as a team? And then how do you handle it? And we were just doing an exercise internally, kind of internal reviews and all that stuff. And kind of went on my feedback piece from last week, but this was more of like a group feedback of how do we handle this as a group? What are our thought processes? And what do we work through as a group to communicate through this? And how do we find success? And so there's this idea that's brought up a lot of times for people where, if you've ever heard of it, but it's the idea of going into the black, or sympathetic and parasympathetic response to fight or flight response to situations. And as a company, that turns into scramble mode, or we've got to just get it done mode, versus we're comfortable and we're getting the job done and we're working on a regular pace. So if the difference for you for success is if it doesn't meet these few perfect criteria you know your team can do, if it doesn't fall into that bucket, and that's what good means. And if you never do an honest assessment of what everything else in between like could be, what other buckets you have your team can fall into of how far off success you are, then everything that doesn't fall into the small criteria you know your team can do is therefore bad. If this is good, that's the only thing you've defined as good, because that's the only two metrics you have. You don't have good, kind of good, okay, not good at all, and bad.
Yeah.
So this idea is like, it's this idea of perception. I don't know how to perceive this situation that we've gotten ourselves into as a company. We don't know. The customer asked for this, and we know how to solve this problem, but now they presented this problem with a twist. So it doesn't meet these perfect criteria. It's this next new problem with a twist. We haven't planned for that, so therefore it must be bad. Looks like we have to go into scramble mode. Whoa. You can't adapt if you don't ever go from good to scramble mode, because that means you're always freaking out as a company, which means you can't communicate. It's the same thing in fight or flight, right? Your body freezes up, blood rushes to the center of mass to fix your organs. You lose motor dexterity, and that dexterity in your fingers and that idea is like your company's dexterity. You're being able to do those world-class deck presentations, the sales motions, the return on investment, non-losing ROI leakage, whatever else your company does in terms of working. Those very fine details your company is really good at that make your competitive advantage better. That's what you lose when you go into scramble mode, because it's just get the job done. So training your team to go, okay, this is what great looks like, and we can do great. What does good look like, and how do we get there? What does this look like? What does this look like? And training your team to understand we can place our capabilities compared to this problem in different buckets, and that teaches us we're this far off the problem. So now we need to move to here by doing X, Y, Z. So that's kind of the exercise we went through, and I kind of brought that up to the team. Like, if it's not good, therefore it's bad. That's not a good way to go through, especially in the situations we're in. So
I literally was reading this for my MBA paper this week. So John, have you heard of John Boyd's OODA loop?
Yeah.
So if anything falls outside that good bucket that you talked about, an OODA loop is exactly a perfect tool to kind of like reorient yourself and get it on track. And the OODA loop essentially stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And basically it's like, okay, if the situation or the circumstance doesn't work out the way it is, or you're walking into something or just something new, observe what's going on, orient towards the direction or goal that you're trying to do, decide on how to do it, and then obviously act and move towards that direction. But it's like, and John Boyd, I think he was an Air Force commander, former Air Force commander, I think. So it's a concept that he developed, but it's a very, very simple tool that you can implement in literally any scenario in your life. Anytime something like a curveball gets thrown at you. And like to Chris's point, like if for some reason you're driving like your project or something towards a scope and it doesn't fall into the bucket that you want. Well, why? Ask yourself why and do an OODA loop and, and figure out how to reorient the direction of the program or the project into the direction that you want, which is that good bucket, right? So, and it avoids what you mentioned of that scramble mode. Because if you have a process or a tool, AKA the OODA loop, you will avoid going into scramble mode and total chaos ensuing.
Let's bring this into a different kind of analogy for people to understand, for everyone listening to understand. You're driving down the highway and you're in the fast lane and you're driving. You've been a driver for years, so your driving is great. And everyone thinks they're the best driver, so we're going to go with you're the best driver. Awesome, right? And so someone kind of moves over in the lane in front of you. They're a little too close. Everyone's had that moment where like someone gets in front of you, you're like, that's a little close. Let me just tap my brake a little bit and slow down. But that's if you have multiple ways to perceive this person's too close. What do I do in this situation? I'm concerned. This is a dangerous situation, or it's okay, and I just need to brake a little bit. So this idea of scramble mode, what I was talking about is it's this idea that goes, okay, someone's gotten in front of me. The customer's changed the scenario or whatever, and now my team has to adapt. I have to adapt this new driver in front of me. But instead of being able to go, let me just tap my brake, because you've trained your team to know the capabilities of your car, the capabilities of your reaction speed, all that stuff. That's what we're talking about, your company's capabilities are. Now, the only thing you can do in scramble mode is slam on the brake. That's it. That's all you know how to do. So your company only knows how to slam on the brake, because that's the only thing that saves your life, apparently. Versus, let me tap my brake. Maybe I can slow down and move to the other lane. I don't really need to be in the left lane. Maybe I need whatever. But all those options are because you either have experience, you've done it before, or you know that there's other ways to solve this said problem as a team or as a person running this vehicle, this company. So if you don't have a lot of those things, either learn experience from other people and get other people to show you, find the way of good companies who have done that, or develop a scenario or team setting so that when it comes up and the fire happens, everyone goes into fire drill mode. We all do this. We exit this way and whatever. So that's why you drill, and that's why you learn your capabilities. If you don't know it, everyone has to slam on the brake.
Yep. You either lock it. So many people are like a lot of companies are so binary in that. It's either lock them up or like pedal to the metal. And there's no like just cruise control at 5 to 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, which will get you there slightly faster, but you're going at a steady pace. It's either pedal to the metal or, lock them up. So that's a great analogy. Absolutely. Outstanding.
Yeah. So the reason we kind of want to talk through adaptability stuff too, and what this really works toward, and there's a difference between being a leader and adapting and being someone on the team and adapting. And we kind of talk through this as to internally for us, what I dealt with at work was we talked through how does it feel as a team and what are the emotions and situations you go through as a team or as someone on the team. And then what are the emotions and situations you have to deal with as a leader and then understand your team's going through during an adaptation mode. So most times when a customer asks for you to adapt or changes the requirements or whatever, there is a feeling, we talked about some of it last week, but there is a feeling of, wow, I feel a little powerless on the team. I feel a little powerless. Now I have to change everything I'm doing. We have to redo work. We have to do it. And this feeling of like helplessness that comes about during this adaptation, if you've never dealt with it, or if you don't have a process or a system to fall back upon. Because if you have a system said, oh, okay, we're not helpless. Like it's just a new scenario. This is my new normal. I'm going to change this. Our team's got us. We know how to do this. We'll follow this. And you always fall back to your training during a situation of adaptation.
Yep.
And so as a leader, what that looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as a leader, what that looks like is you have to understand, how do I communicate this new adaptation to my team? And then how do I accept the adaptation? So I either accept adaptation and say, does this make sense? Can my company do it? Do I know the requirements and capabilities of my team? And then I go, cool, how do I communicate this to my team in a way where they react to fall into our system of training rather than going into scramble mode? And we cover a lot of that during the class. That's a lot of what we go into.
It's weird. Chris would tied it in perfectly, and I knew he was, and if he didn't, I was going to do it. But it's almost like these foundations of leadership all tie together, because in order to help you be adaptable, you need to communicate, or the better the communication is, it's easier to adapt for your team to adapt. If you communicate the scope change early, it turns the less your team turns into scramble mode, or the less your company turns into scramble mode. So the better you are at these 6 and 7 pillars that we're going to teach you, the better your company is. Hence, your foundation is stronger. Hence, you have systems in place. Hence, you're going to always have the ability to adapt, overcome, build and develop a team, build and develop a project, build and develop the best product for your customer. All of these fall on this foundation that we're trying to give to you and that you guys can build your systems on. So great tie-in, Chris. It's exactly right.
It's almost like I read the script.
That's right. Exactly.
So, that's the biggest thing that I found just with business, and especially with teams, small teams, big teams. If you don't know how to communicate the new requirements from your customer and how they communicate to you, it doesn't matter as long as the team that's doing the work doesn't, and they're not client facing, as long as they don't have to get the information one way, you're going to be that filter as the leader or as the person in charge. Or as the person responsible of the project. You're going to be the person to be able to filter all the communication and then decipher and create a message that inspires and that informs and allows your team to adapt and succeed and overcome whatever situation it is. So that inspiration and information, that is your job as a leader. And then your team's capabilities is where they adapt and overcome by producing the product only they know how to, because they have the capabilities, because you trust them.
Yeah, and that inspiration too, like that doesn't come from necessarily a rah-rah speech. Like, don't think this is something like before a sports game. But what Chris is talking about is if you communicate properly the why and understand, like you would be so like the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Poor communication destroys morale. If you know on the opposite end exactly what you're doing and you know how to get there, how much more likely are you to run full speed towards accomplishing that goal when you can like understand it? It's a like conceptualized into your head and you can see it and go after it. It's so much better. The power of communication makes you so much more adaptable. It's just it's awesome.
In your situation, what you brought up earlier from your example for this week, if your leader comes to you and says, "Hey team, so I just want to talk about 2 things. Looks like we have a requirements change and we're going to be building a new product for our customer." What this means and what you all did the past couple of weeks of your work to get to X solution that we had before was great. And now we have that as a template to build for anyone else that needs it and when this requirement comes back up for the team. So great work there. Okay, what we're going to do is they're asking for a new thing. I knew this is going to take a lot extra effort for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to fall back upon the people who've been doing really great in this last project. Carly, you've been doing great here. Jeff, I love to see this here out of you. Want to move this to this situation. Lisa, you've been doing this really well here. We're going to keep that and move you into this position here because I saw this great work. And so now I've inspired them by giving them responsibility, by complimenting all the things they did, saying that's going to be great, we're going to use in the future. And now this seems as if it's just a change or a change in direction, rather than we're going backwards from where we were, from success. We're not going backwards from success. We've achieved success, and now we're going to go, cool, we're going to re-vector toward a new pillar of success out in the distance, still moving forward. So it's either you teach your team that, oh, we've gone backwards, and the customer's making us go backwards and whatever, and that loses morale. But then if you re-vector toward a different level of success or a different point of success, that just says, okay, we're all moving forward. You've done a great job. Let's move toward this new success metric.
And that's exactly what happened. Literally to a T. The technology that we built are used for 2 customers as is. So that wasn't throwaway work. Now we just to your point, all right, now we just need to pivot and change our focus to these new requirements instead of it being, oh, what a waste of time, in having it perceived as a negative connotation. The work was still relevant. The work is still important. And the work is still being used. And now we're just going to pivot. What we've done is, like you said, a template or as a platform that we've already developed and use that as a baseline now to tie into the requirements that need it. There will be obviously extra work and new work to be done because, it's new requirements. But to your point, that other work was not throwaway work by any means. So it worked out very well.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think that's pretty good in regards to this week. I'll kill the recording instead of shutting everything off like I did last week.